Hey everybody, what's going on? Charlie Stevens here for jamplay.com. This is our sixth and final week of this live lesson series on fretboard focus. We've been doing a lot of good work here, learning our major scales in 4 different keys. Last week we kind of dipped outside of that a little bit and we visited the realm of pentatonic scales. This week is going to be really fun. We're going to talk about kind of a lot of the different things that we have talked about in the previous weeks, and I'm going to give you some practical applications on how to use some of these scale patterns and other things that we've talked about. And yeah, hopefully we can get you playing music with these ideas. You know, it's just kind of a starting point to get you running and using your imagination with all this stuff. So yeah, like I said, this is going to be our last week for this series. So if you have any questions and if you're confused about anything we've talked about up to this point or that I discussed today, please don't hesitate to shoot those out to us, and I'll try to answer those for you. So if you guys remember, those of you who watched the first week was all about single string playing, and that we had just kind of played major scales just on individual strings. And so the first thing that we're going to learn today is how we can use that concept. So we're going to use just a single string to play this lick, okay? So the idea behind this lick is a sequence. So a sequence is when we do the same kind of idea over and over again, but we'll start it in a different place throughout the scale maybe. So in this case, we're going to do a 3-note sequence. So I'm going to play through my major scale, just the first 3 notes of it. And that's the first part of my sequence, okay? That is my sequence, the 3 notes. So now I sequence that idea. So basically I do the exact same thing where I play 3 notes, but now I'm going to start somewhere else. So I'm going to start at the second note I played right here. See that? So we had... Okay, so we're just kind of moving that 3-note pattern throughout the scale. And this is a really good way to start using our scales because it's great to know how to play your scales up and back, and a lot of times when we're actually improvising or playing melodies, certain passages have a lot of things that are stepwise or, scalular or something like that, where they will be all the notes of the major scale in order. But a lot of times when we're playing music, they won't be totally in order, right? We'll have musical ideas that are going to use the framework of these scales and kind of mix around the order of the notes. So this is just a really great way to get you moving in a kind of a different way around these scales and thinking about them in a different way, and not always just so linear from point A to point B, but, 3 at a time back, just kind of going around. And these ones almost kind of have a circular feel to me. It's kind of like a spiral, Okay, so that's the whole thing. And of course we could do sequences with different numbers of notes, right? 4-note sequences are really common. Okay, for today we're just going to stick to 3 though, but I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that you can kind of do as many of these as you want. I feel like 5 notes gets to a point where it's a little bit less practical, but they're still really worth practicing, especially depending on what kind of music you're into. Some more progressive kind of styles will definitely use patterns like that. For just more general kind of more basic styles, 3 and 4-note patterns are really common, and once we do these exercises today, I think you'll start to hear those in a lot of improvised solos and things like that that you listen to. Great, so let's go ahead and we'll just start learning this first example here. So it's just the one I've been playing on the open G string, okay? So we're going to go ahead and use the same fingerings that we had learned when we had learned this scale originally in week 1. Now, there's many different ways you can do this. So if you didn't watch week 1 and you are just getting started with this, you can even just use 1 finger. But that's a lot of work. That's a lot of bouncing around. So we're not going to want to do that. We're going to want to use a certain fingering, which I'll show you here. Okay, so... And actually, you know what, I guess I shouldn't say it's the same one that we've been learning, because we had learned one that was sort of like this, where we shifted. We did a shift here and a shift here. And now this this scale actually, or excuse me, this sequence actually won't work in the same way because of the fact that we're constantly going back and forth through the notes. So we don't really get the luxury of going from this position to this position and just kind of totally shifting, because we're going to have to be kind of in between the different positions at the same time, because we're going to have to go back and start our sequence on the notes that we've already used, if that makes sense. Yeah, great. So that's our first part, open G string. Then our first finger plays the A note on the 2nd fret, and our third finger plays the B on the 4th fret. Okay, so that's our first sequence. Okay, our next one is going to start on the 1st finger and play the 3rd finger, and then our 4th finger plays the 5th fret, the note C. Okay. Now, the most practical thing to do is to shift here. So once we get past that open string, it makes sense to start all of our ascending licks, meaning we're going this way. All of our ascending patterns make sense to start with our 1st finger, right? So we started this one. So rather than using my 3rd finger and 4th finger again and then like shift for the next one, I mean, you could do that if you're in a playing situation that requires you to be up here and maybe you weren't expecting to do that and you just heard it. You know, that could be cool. But if we're planning out all our fingering and playing this as an exercise, it makes more sense to shift here. That way I don't have to shift in the middle of that little sequence, right? Same thing here, okay? So we had this, then we shift. We start with our 1st finger on the B note of the 4th fret. 2nd finger plays the C on the 5th fret, and our pinky reaches up for the D on the 7th fret. Okay, so we had this one, right? And now we have this one. Now, if we keep going, we're going to slide up positions again. Our 1st finger is going to start the pattern. 1st finger on the 5th fret, note C. 2nd finger, you could use the 3rd finger here too, but I think the 2nd is a little more comfortable. That gives you a little more reach for the next finger we're going to need. The 2nd finger plays the 7th fret, which is the note D. And the pinky reaches up and plays the note E on the 9th fret. So we have this pattern now. See how they're all a whole step apart? They're spread like that. So for those of you who watched the stream we did, I think it was 2 weeks ago, it was when we were talking about closed position scales, I had mentioned that we really only have 3 different patterns of 3 notes on a string during any part of a major scale, right? So we see that again here, right? We had this one where it's 1st finger, 3rd finger, 4th finger. Okay, if we start that one here, it becomes 1st finger, 2nd finger, 4th finger. And then we have the one where they're all spread like this. Okay, and that's all of our patterns. And that's true for all of our scales too. So it's really cool. This is a good way to practice that because we're starting right on the 1st finger of that, and we're practicing these little 3-note kind of cells. You could think about them like that. And yeah, then all your position stuff, it's just kind of different combinations of where those patterns break down on each string. But it's really not that complicated, right, guys? It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool how they reoccur. It makes it kind of easy for us. Okay, so we had that. We had that. Then we shifted. Okay, then we shifted again. Can you guess what we're going to do now? Well, we're going to shift, right? So the next note in our scale is right here. We're going to use our 1st finger to play it. And hey, that's that same pattern that we just had. Kind of sounds cool to play them like that, right? Those are all the whole steps apart. We haven't run into any half steps between those notes. They're just kind of cool. So we have that pattern twice in a row, and then we have one more pattern. So now we're gonna move our 1st finger. By the way, that is the 7th, the 9th, and the 11th fret, just in case you weren't catching that. I moved the whole pattern that was 5, 7, and 9 up 2 frets, so now it's 7, 9, 11, okay? And if we move that to the last shape before we get back to our octave, we started on fret 9, 11 with the 3rd finger, and the 4th finger plays the 12th fret on G again. Okay, do you see how that's this one again? We had this one up here, 1st finger, 3rd finger, 4th finger. Okay, if we kept going up the neck, we would see that the next pattern is the next pattern we got. It's just always going to work like that. These two are always going to be right after each other. And then after that, we have 2 in a row of these, and then just one of those before he gets back. Yeah, you don't necessarily need to memorize it like that, but it's just something I've noticed. We're gonna have this one where they're spread twice in a row at a certain point, and then we have the ones that are together again, and then we have another one that's spread. This is the one we were playing with an open string. Technically, that's a spread one too, and then so that one's by itself. The whole steps away, and then it goes back to that other pattern. But when we get to these two, we have two of those exact same patterns in a row. So if that helps you make sense of things, that's true. On every string, in every scale, it's just kind of a combination of those different things, okay? So let's go ahead and try to play that together really slowly, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you could see that I was doing the opposite on the way down, right? I don't think I really talked about that. But just like we were moving our first finger to start the pattern every time, on the way back down the neck, which is this way, right, guys? I was leading with my fourth finger. See how I changed there? Because I know I'm going to have this bigger stretch, so it's kind of uncomfortable to do that or to have to shift in the middle of the pattern. Although you could try that. You could try this pattern with shifts and kind of let those slides be heard. That could sound really cool too. Maybe you want that kind of sound. Tons of different little things you can do with this kind of concept. Good. That's a good way to get up and down the strings too if you're kind of lost in an area of the neck. If you're confident on one string up and down, you can kind of travel down that string until you get to an area of the neck that maybe you are more comfortable in. You know, like if I'm in G, maybe I got all the way up here, and I'm going, uh-oh. I'm going, uh-oh. Where are my notes? Okay, I kind of found some of them, but I don't know where I am. But I know my G string, so I can come back up here. Now I'm back. That kind of thing, you know, just little different tricks that can help us out if we ever get in a pinch. And single string stuff is definitely important for that. And we could do 4 notes per string, like I said. We could do a lot of different things with that too. But we're going to go ahead and move on from the 1 note per string, and we'll kind of touch back on that idea as we integrate it into licks, because it can be really helpful for just understanding the difference between the half steps and whole steps, those little patterns I was talking about. And it can be really helpful for navigating between the different positions. And so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more, but we're basically just kind of focused on how we can learn from that right now. But it has a ton of different lick possibilities too that are, especially when there's an open string involved. There's a lot of potential for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next example. This one is going to be the same exact idea. It's going to be a 3-note sequence, but instead of just staying on our single open G string, we're going to use our open position for a G major scale. So let me review that G major scale here. Okay, and I go into a detailed explanation of that scale in the 3rd week of this series, I believe. So I'll walk you through it one more time a little bit slowly, but if you're still kind of having a little bit trouble with it, you can go ahead and check that out on the archive on Jamplay. Okay, so it's the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret, G, open A string, 2nd finger, 2nd fret, B, 3rd finger, 3rd fret for C, open D string, 2nd finger on the E note on the 2nd fret, open G string, 2nd finger, oh, I'm sorry, I was not right, I skipped a note. After the E note, we're going to need an F sharp. We use our pinky on the 4th fret. Then we go to G, open G, A on the 2nd fret, open B, first fret on the B string, note C, third fret, D, open, second finger to second fret for F sharp, and finally third fret plays the G again. Okay, so that's our G open position. As I mentioned before, it's just a really good key for the guitar. A lot of good harmonics, just a very accessible key for us. We have a lot of open strings we can use. Where it starts and ends is kind of manageable within our fret. We can get all the way up here and still reach that G, or be down here and still be kind of near our lowest notes, but still have a few lower ones if we want. So there's just a couple reasons why G is just a really good key. And the open position of G is awesome because it's got a lot of open strings, right? And it's right here when we're doing all of our G, C, and D chord stuff. All of those notes are just really kind of accessible and just kind of on open strings and right by where our fingers already are playing those chords. So it really makes sense to apply these kind of concepts to that and really be able to make a whole ton of music out of this kind of simple concept, and it really lends itself well to it. So go ahead and embrace that idea. So if we're playing the 3-note sequence in this open position G major, that would sound like this. Okay, this could also be done really effectively if we were treating these as triplets. I wrote it out as quarter notes in 3/4 times. We could really see each measure in your tab is one cell of that sequence, right? So it's really easy to see that. But that would be if they're all on different beats, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Another way that could be more used in your playing as you progress with this idea is to use it on each beat. Right? Ba-da-da-da-da-da. Each one of those is a beat. 1, 1, 2, 3. It's hard for me to count that because it's triple-a, 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 triple-a. So it's hard for me to say 1, 2. But every time I'm saying triplet, it's in the span of just one beat. So that could be a really good way to improve this if this is already something that you're finding pretty easy. But if it's new to you, then go ahead and take it really slow and just check out these cells and how they look. And go really slow with them and just sort of understand how this pattern works, because this really is a great way to practice your scales. We can get so caught up in going up and back, and this isn't even really the end. We could do all these other kind of bigger leaps of intervals and, you know, where we're skipping around too. This is still just all the notes in a row, but now we're starting them in different places. So we're just learning how to branch out our scale a little bit more every day. And that's really important because the more comfortable you are with your scale, the more that's going to come through in your music, and you're not going to have to think about things that are going to interfere with your musical ideas as much. Okay, so let's just walk through this one together. So third finger on the 3rd fret, open A, second finger on the 2nd fret. That's our whole first cell of this. Okay, next one starts on the last note we played, right? So that is open A. A, B, C, okay. Next one starts on the last note we played, so we backpedal this one. B, C, open D, okay. Now we go back to the C, right? C, D, E, okay. Can you guess where we start now? D, E, F sharp, E, F sharp, G, F sharp, G, A, G, A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D, E, F sharp, E, F sharp, G. Right? So that's a really cool pattern. Okay, and going back, it's the same way. Excellent. All right, let's try playing this together. We're going to do it really slow, and I'm going to call out when we're on the last line here, so we can make sure we turn the page for that next page of tab. Okay, really slow. Ready? 1, 2, together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Second line. Third line now. Fourth line. Last line of this page. And back down. Last measure of that line. And we're on the next page now. Wait for it. Ready, go. Awesome, awesome. So yeah, I hope that wasn't too hard for you guys. It's a little tricky when you're first getting into this, so give yourself time. If it is, play it even slower than that. Practice it for a while. But yeah, I think those are just really cool, and I hear that a lot in just music in general. I hear a lot of those. That's a little bit of a different idea, but it's almost the same thing, right? Let's see. Because I'm only going to the third note. If I do my 3-note pattern, 1, 2, 3, I get there, right? So this lick is kind of the same thing. We've traveled the same distance, but we fancified at that. So let me just show you this lick. This isn't in our tab or anything. This is just something that I just thought of just now as I'm kind of coming up with different ideas for this, right? But instead of 1, 2, 3, we go. Okay, it's a little bit trickier now that I slow it down, but so it goes G, down to the F sharp, back to the G, A, B. So that was our little cell. Did you see that? We went down first, and this is basically where we started it, right? And now we're going to go back to our first note. And we just do the same thing again. Okay, so that was that first cell twice in a row. And then I went down to the lower note first. And then I did that cell twice in a row. Okay, so see how that's like really musical stuff that you've probably heard before, and it's just kind of that simple, It's and it can be fancified a little more and messed around with. It's music, it's art. It's supposed to be kind of have your stamp on a little bit. It's kind of cool. But essentially, knowing that kind of vocabulary and how that kind of sounds and feels to play through scales like that can really help you as you're writing your own licks that do kind of stuff like that. You'll just start hearing these ideas that are going to go and you'll know how to do that because you've practiced these things, and it won't just be totally out of the blue for you. So yeah, I'd really encourage you to try to write some licks that use these. I'd also encourage you, if you're a little bit more advanced and these are a little bit on the easier side for you, or they're just not new to you anymore, then I would recommend you start experimenting with like 4-note patterns. I think I demonstrated this earlier too. Whoops, got a little off there, but you know what I mean, right? You can just kind of use your knowledge of all these scales we've learned to apply different patterns to this. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I want to save some time to talk about some other stuff today. So let's go ahead and just continue on with our next example. So the next example is in a closed position. So it's essentially going to sound pretty much the same as the one we just did. But it's going to feel a little different for our hands. It's going to look a little different because it's going to be up on this part of the neck. But we're really moving between the exact same notes. So I actually don't think it really matters which one you play. So if you like one of them better than the other, you can kind of dig into that one more. The closed position is arguably a little bit more useful, because if you can do in the key of G, well, you can automatically do that in the key of C, the key of D, A, anywhere you want. You can just move that pattern and do it. If you're trying to do all those keys in the open position, you'd have to sort of relearn them, right? You'd have to do it in the open position version of C that we learned, and so on and so forth. It wouldn't be just a pattern that you can plug into a new starting point and just hit the ground running. But these closed positions are exactly like that. Okay, so if you practice this one, you're learning like all of the keys that are possible with this position here. Okay, so we're going to start with our second finger on the note G this time instead of our third finger, because instead of playing the open A, we're going to get that same note A right here on the 5th fret of our low E string. Hopefully that's one of the notes we're memorizing, right? This is an A note here. We want to learn some of the notes on our 5th string as we're kind of starting to map our fretboard a little bit. Okay, and then we cross over. We still play the B, but this time it's going to be with our first finger on the 2nd fret. Second finger plays on the 3rd fret. Oops, I'm sorry. We're doing a 3-note pattern, so we're not quite there yet. That's all we have so far, right? And then we would continue on to this note, but since we're doing a sequence, we're actually going to go backwards, right? And start on our 4th finger on the A note here. And then we get to that note. We go 3 notes to it. Bum, bum, bum. So that's the 4th finger. First finger on the 2nd fret. Second finger on the 3rd fret on C. Now we have this little pattern. 1, 2, 4 in terms of finger numbers. 2, 3, 5 in terms of frets. That's enough right there. We don't even almost need to do the whole scale. That sounds kind of musical. You know, something like that. Cool. So from here, then we're going to start on C. 1, 2. We already told you where that one note was because it's the last one of our last sequence. So that one should have been obvious, right? But where do we go after this? 1, 2. Yep, cross to the E on the 4th fret, 2nd fret, 4th string. Okay, then we start on the D note, 5th fret with the 4th finger on the 5th fret. Whoops, sorry. Oh, that is right. I surprised myself starting here because it was sort of out of context because I took some time before applying the rest of the scale, but that's correct. Right? So we go 4th finger, 1st finger, 3rd finger. Okay, now we have this pattern that we're familiar with the 1st finger, 3rd finger, and 4th finger, right? On frets 2, 4, and 5. Okay. Then we start it here on the 3rd finger. 4th finger plays 5th fret. 1st finger crosses strings, 2nd fret. Then we have that exact same pattern. See that? Same finger pattern. Finally get there to start on our 2nd fret here. Okay, great. 3rd finger, 4th finger, then our 2nd finger plays the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Okay, then our 4th finger plays the 5th fret of the 3rd string, 2nd finger to the 3rd fret of the 2nd string, and 4th finger to the 5th fret of the 2nd string. Whoops. Okay, then we start on the 2nd finger, 3rd fret. Same note that came after it last time, so 5th fret with the pinky. Reaching up here to the 2nd fret with the 1st finger. Okay, then we're going to start with our pinky on the 5th fret. And that's it. 5, 1st fret, ending on the 3rd fret, okay? Going back down is the same. Eventually you can do that kind of fast and it won't be as sloppy as me, okay? I was just kind of messing around. But see how it can be kind of fluid and smooth and really kind of fun, right? And I'm sure you've heard that kind of stuff. It's just all of a sudden... It's like, oh, it kind of sounds kind of fancy. It sounds like you might have done something, even though it kind of sounded like I just fell down the stairs, too, because I was kind of just being really sloppy with it, right? But the more we play these, the more we can incorporate them into our normal kind of thing. So why don't we try to do this one together as well? So again, I'm going to call out the lines as we go here, okay? Really slow. 1, 2, 3. Forgot to call the second line, but here we are at the third line now. Fourth line. Last line here. Last measure, and here we go. Yeah. All right, great job, guys. And great job, Chris, with that page turn. That was clutch. All right, so we got through all of our major scale ones, and now I have another sequence that's going to be the same sequence, but we're going to use the G pentatonic scale. We could have used the G major pentatonic. I decided to use the G minor just because we had been talking about everything sort of centered around box 1 as a minor scale last time, right? Sorry. That's major. That actually sounds really cool, major. So all you have to do that one is just take your box 2 pattern and start it here on G. But the way that we're going to do it is with a minor scale, because the minor pentatonic is used a little bit more frequently, I think. And also, like I said, we sort of centered our discussion about that around this shape of it last week. So the pentatonic scale has a different sound when we do that, right? It's not the same because it's a different scale. It doesn't have the same pattern that the major scale has. We have bigger distances in there. You know, our major scale was always a whole step or a half step. Well, the very first interval we have in this scale is a fret of a span of 3 frets, which is a minor third interval. It's not a whole step nor a half step, right? It's actually a step and a half. It's a little bit bigger than that. We would call it a minor third, and that's just going to give the scale a very different sound as we kind of sequence through this. We have a different interval in there now. Previously, it had only been either a whole step or a half step, and yeah, they were kind of mixed up, but we still got a very consistent sound on that. Now we have whole steps, but we also have this minor third in there. And we actually don't have half steps in the pentatonic scale, unless we decide to add in some color tones like the blue note here, which can be a really cool thing to do with this exercise. See, I'm really laying into that note. Let me explain it the way it's written here without that and without the fancy stuff first, and then we'll also kind of talk about how to sneak that blue note in there, okay? So I'm going to walk you guys through this again. Hopefully you watched my series my lesson last week that talked about these pentatonics, and they're not totally new to you. If they are, you can pull that up on the Jam Play archive. I'm sure there's tons more lessons about pentatonic scales on there too. So feel free to just watch as much as you can on that stuff. It helps it all click for you, okay? But so for box 1, first finger on the 3rd fret, pinky finger on the 6th fret, and then our first finger on the 3rd fret again of the next string. That's our first cell. Okay, then as always, we start on the next note, so we go back to the pinky, we go 3 notes from there. Okay, so that's the pinky, 3rd fret with the 1st finger, and 5th fret with the 3rd finger. Okay, now we start here, and we go fingers 1, 3, 1 as we cross strings. That's kind of like that lick we learned. We learned a lick last week that was like, that's kind of the same idea. Right? It's kind of the same thing. So that's a cool lick. 1, 2, 3, 1, da, 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 da. Okay, so even though that's only part of a sequence, it can also be extracted from the sequence and just used as a standalone link. Oops. Okay, great. So we had that, and now the next sequence starts on the third finger. Okay, that's kind of a lick too. Okay, then the next sequence is the same as the last one because it's 1, fingers 1, 3, 1 again, right? The next sequence is the same as the one that we had prior to that. See that? It's all pretty similar, right? And it's all pretty cool too. Here it gets a little different when we get to the B string because we have to go all the way up to the 6th fret with our 4th finger, right? But that whole middle of the scale is just two, since the pentatonic scale is only 2 notes per string patterns most of the time. There are a few other ways to dice it up, but most of the time people generally don't, and will play them 2 notes per string. But since it's pretty even because there's only these 2 patterns. We go 1, 3, and then 1 again, or we go 3, 1, 3 again. See what I mean? And that pattern repeats. Okay, so that whole middle of the scale for me is very comfortable. And if I ever want to play something fast like that, I don't really have to think about it too much because I've practiced these patterns. And it's not like this whole, it's not an inspired melodic idea that just came to me. It's just something that I'm allowing to come out of the fretboard because I have that under my fingers, which isn't always the best way to compose music or something. You don't want to do that too much where you're relying too much on fretboard tricks, but I mean, I think you should totally lean into stuff like that. It can make you have a really good time playing and take your playing to the next level. Don't leave it there, but use it to get past that even, you know? Okay, but once we get here, we got to use our pinky finger, so the pattern's a little bit different. But not much. It's just our pinky finger instead of that, right? And then we have first finger, pinky, first finger on the next fret. Let me start with the pinky for the last pattern. Let me get up there, okay? Okay, would you guys like to try to play this together? Yeah? All right. So we got the tab up there, and it's a 2-pager as well, looks like, huh? 4, please. No, I think this one's actually only 1.
It's 2.
Oh, it is 2. Okay. Well, I'll call out the lines again, and we'll do our best. All right. Awesome. Ready? Nice and slow. 1, 2, 3. Next line. Next line. Next line. Back down the scale. And last line here. Last measure. Excellent. Yeah, awesome, awesome. And as I was saying, we can treat those instead of whole beats. You can treat those as individual beats. Or excuse me, I didn't explain that very well. Instead of treating each cell as an entire measure of 3 different beats, we could treat all of those as subdivisions of 1 beat. So if you're not sure what that means, that's okay. But basically, when all music has a pulse, and we can kind of tap our foot to it or clap our hands to it. 1, 2, 3, and then this time signature we would count to 3 again, right? That's kind of how we're dividing the music up. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But we could make that shorter. We could split those whole numbers in half. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 or we could split them in thirds. Yeah, so it'd be 3 notes per beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Triple, triple. We call those triplets. Okay, so using this idea, any of the ideas we've explored in this video, since they are 3-note patterns, they lend themselves very well to triplets. Sorry, I made some mistakes there. But you see what I mean? We can get it up to a really nice speed in thinking about them as triplets because they're 3-note patterns. They feel really natural that way. But they don't have to be. You can use them kind of however you'd like. Excellent. Yeah, and sometimes these patterns can just be really useful to give you time to think. Maybe you'll be playing an improvised solo, and maybe you won't have a great idea about what to do next, and you won't quite be sure about where you want to bring the solo. But if you have some stuff like this under your fingers, it's not necessarily a lick, because it's more of like a formula on how you can make licks and just get around the scale, right? So it's kind of cool to have stuff like that under your fingers, and you can kind of play stuff like that, and maybe that will give you an idea for a lick, or it will help you travel to a different part of the fingerboard that you have an idea for there, or is just more comfortable for you, and you can grab something. Just a ton of different ways to really think about it. But I always have found these to be really helpful and really pretty musical too. I use them a lot in my solos when I'm improvising. I'll kind of throw in some of these sequential ideas around. Excellent. So, why don't we try to play through that one example one more time, and then I'm going to kind of give some closing thoughts about the whole series and kind of explain how some other things that we didn't have time to talk about because we were focused on a specific topic in this lesson, but I did mention some other kind of related areas of thought that can maybe be helpful to tie in your knowledge, especially if this is stuff you're feeling really comfortable with already. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and play this example, and we can kind of get into talking about that stuff. All right. 1, 2, 3. Next line. And next line here. Next line. Back down the scale. Next line. Last line, that is. Last measure of that line now. And awesome, thank you. Okay, now I know we're reading the tab and we're putting this up for you, but to me it's really important that you can do that without the tab. Okay, and if you can't, and this is brand new to you, and you're just learning this for the first time today, that's okay. I'm not saying, oh man, you can't do that. What the heck is wrong with you? Don't get that idea. But I mean, you should keep working towards it to the fact where you're not relying on this tab, because that's kind of the point of the exercise, to have these shapes kind of internalized to the point where we're able to use them just, on a whim in a real life playing situation. Okay, so try not to rely on the tab too much and break away from that and really learn these patterns. That's part of what this is about, is just kind of solidifying all the patterns we learned, as well as to give you stuff to do in a real life playing situation, which, as I was mentioning, is kind of cool because they're not really licks. And sometimes we can get caught up in playing the licks we know, but that can be a problem because licks don't always work. A lot of times they're very interchangeable, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes we might insert a lick in a place and it might not quite work, but because we're thinking, hey, I'm going to use this lick, it comes off sounding like that lick. Whereas if we're thinking, hey, I'm going to use this idea, it's not tied into any sort of specific thing as much, maybe, like an idea. This third string, this could work in all sorts of different musical situations, and not just a few. Like some licks are definitely just blues licks, right? Well, I actually have been known to put that in a few other places too, but I've gotten a funny look or two for doing that in the wrong spot as well. So it really is more of a blues lick than anything. But my point is, these things don't really have those associations, right? They're just more of a broad way to view music as a collection of sounds, and how we can kind of make up our own thing and learn from that. Good. So yeah, I hope you guys really like that, and you can do 4-note patterns in pentatonic is really easy because it's 2 notes per string. A little bit tricky because of where you have to change strings and stuff, so it's a little bit difficult on the picking hand, but it sounds good, and it's fun. So try to take all the stuff we talked about today, try to learn them in 4-note sequences too. Unless it's all really new to you, then just take your time, okay? But yeah, this is the kind of stuff that you can keep coming back to. It's great as like finger warm-ups too. If you're about to do some practicing and maybe you have a half hour to practice, maybe spend 5 minutes just kind of doing some of these Maybe just play your scales straight through. Remember where all your notes are. Say, okay, I remember where those notes are. Let's do 3 notes. Then go, okay, maybe I'll do 4 notes. Whoops. Whoops, sorry. Guess I haven't done that one in a while. I'm a little rusty there. I should work myself back up to shape because those are really handy and I used to use them a lot. And you can do those, of course, in all the different major scales that we learned and shapes like that. Ooh, I just remembered I forgot to tell you guys about the blues notes. We were going to throw those in there with these 3-note patterns, remember? We never got around to doing that. So hopefully you guys remember where the blues notes are. Again, that's the flat 5th interval. So it's the note D flat in the key of G, which is what we're in. We're in G minor pentatonic. So it's just right there. So when we're on the 5th string, it's in between the notes that we were playing on the 5th string. So right on the 4th fret. The other blue note is on the 3rd string. Play it with the pinky here. The way I like to remember where this one is it's kind of the transition between how I have this pattern with the 3rd finger, and then over on these strings I have this pattern with the 4th finger. Well, if I add this one in with the 4th finger, now this one is both, right? So I kind of think of this as bridging the gap between how these ones stop at the 3rd finger and this one goes to the 4th finger, but that kind of lets me know. Maybe that's just something that I used to think about, but if that's helpful for you, great, okay? Don't forget about that one on the way back. So yeah, since we have those half steps in there, it just really lends itself nicely to that 3-note sequence. So let's try that together. So now that you know where those 2 blues notes are, hopefully you can follow along with this. Okay, I'll go really slow. 1, 2, 3. Here it comes. Ready? Nice. These are all 3 in a row. Good. That one's crunchy because we started on it. Did you hear that? Maybe you want that sound sometimes, though. It's kind of cool, right? All right, sorry to stop you, but I just wanted to point out how crunchy that one was because we actually started on the dissonance. The one where we ended on the dissonance was pretty crunchy too, right? The one where the dissonance in the middle was not that crunchy. Just kind of sounded like we smoothed right through those notes. So that's a good takeaway too, is that anything is fair game as a passing tone. If you can blend a note between 2 other notes that you know are already going to sound good together, okay, yeah, sometimes it will sound better than others, and you can't just necessarily do it with total reckless abandon. There are some things to consider, but it's always allowed. It's always a possibility. It might sound better in certain cases than others, but yeah, as a passing tone, there really are no wrong notes. Okay, we'll start that over now that we've heard how that sounds. Okay, from the top. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Back in our regular pattern for a while. We don't have any blue notes in here. Here comes one. Ready? Right there. Now we start on it. And back down. Ready, go. Here comes the blue note. Start on it. Now we don't have it for a while. Here it comes. Start on it. And finish it off. I like when we start on it going down. Right? So for me, I can play that a lot faster because I was mentioning how it's kind of tough to pick quickly on 2-note per string patterns. But since we have this little 3-note per string pattern, it's easier to pick for some reason. Because our pick has to do less work, doesn't have to move between strings. It can just kind of stay closer and just kind of get at that. So yeah, I think that one's a really cool one. I just wanted to point that out, how that all works. Okay, great. Yeah.
We got a question if you want to answer.
Awesome. Yeah.
So Keith Edwards says, when you're playing the scale, how important is it to have the right fingering pattern, and how do you know if you have the right fingering pattern?
Great question. Well, it depends on a number of things. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you. It depends on the scale, and it depends on your preference, and there's always going to be different options of fingering things. So I don't necessarily know if there is a right or wrong way. I know a lot of great guitarists, and sometimes they have differences of opinion about this. Now, if you had watched the lesson I did about closed position scales, I had talked about reasons why those fingerings were important because it would have changed the definition of the position we were in. So let me just talk about that again. So a position is basically, we're going to line up our 4 fingers over 1 fret each. Okay, so this is second position because I'm lined up starting at the 2nd fret here. I'm allowed to stretch back to the 1st fret, and I'm allowed to shift up, or stretch up my pinky to the 6th fret. But I'm not really allowed to do too much else because if I move either of my center fingers here, now I'm in a different position. That amounts to changing position, which isn't a bad thing, and sometimes it's good to do that. But if you want to be using strict definitions of a position, then it is going to matter because the other fingerings you use are going to amount to different positions. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't answer that more clearly. I wish I had a better specific example of what you're fingering because there are certain things that are just totally up to you, right? So let's take this one for example. We have those 3 notes in a row. I can do that with my 3rd finger if I'd like. There's no rule against that, but I don't like that there. Personally, that doesn't feel comfortable for me. I like my 2nd finger there. However, if I'm playing this one here, A major, I could have, well actually I guess I couldn't have done that by my rule of position anyway, because if I do that same fingering, then I've changed this. This is supposed to be here, right? But that's more comfortable for me anyway for some reason. Because of where I'm coming from and where I'm heading in the scale, it's more comfortable for me to make that 3-note, and do you know what I mean by that 3-note thing? It's a whole step between each 3. It's not one of our other patterns where they were together. It's more comfortable for me to make it like that. But that's not necessarily wrong if you do that. It sort of does break the technical definition of changing position, but again, that's not really wrong. So I would practice scales with the most practical fingering you can think of. One rule of thumb for most times we play guitar, especially with scales, we don't want to use the same finger for the same note, right? So I'm going to use my next finger. I'm not going to slide and use this finger. So there's certain things to keep in consideration, but a lot of it does have to do with your personal preferences.
Well, speaking of the thumb, we have an additional question. What about the thumb? Where should that be in line with?
Okay, great question. And this is something that's a little bit personal preference as well, and it also is going to change based on your current playing situation, what you're actually doing. I like to keep it behind these 2 fingers, kind of. So that's kind of the center of my hand, right? Sorry, I'm trying to find a good angle to show you guys what I'm talking about here. But I feel like it's kind of the center of my hand, so I like it to be sort of back there. As opposed to here. Now, I actually had a kind of a bad habit of being back here, and the reason is, so for those of you who tuned in last week, we did the pentatonics outside the box at the end, and we talked about, how to slide through these boxes. So that was my favorite thing to do. I went from box 1 pentatonic up to box 2 pentatonic, but I didn't really know too much stuff up here, so generally speaking, I didn't stay up here. I got my little extension of the scale and got some high notes that were out of my reach when I was back there, and then I would slide back to my comfort zone and stay here. So I had a bad habit to leave my thumb. So it's hard to see on the back of the neck, but it's still over here. See that? Because I knew, and that's not really a big problem if I'm just doing it for a second. It can almost give me a little leverage to come back, right? But technically speaking, you're going to want to let that thumb move with you. And once I started doing that, I was able to free up more tension in my hand and get free up some of the tension. Yeah, exactly. Free up more of the tension that was in my hands, causing there to be less tension in my hand. And I was able to get more fluidity and more speed out of that. So yeah, where your thumb placement is incredibly important. And yeah, I think between these two fingers is a good rule of thumb. Behind your middle finger is kind of a good place. You definitely don't want it anywhere where your fingers have to exert a force on this side of the fretboard. Your thumb should be in a good place to exert an equal and opposite force on the back side of the fretboard. I know that's a little bit simplistic, and again, it's totally going to be a little bit different based on your hands. I have some students who play with their thumb kind of on here like this, only it will be back here, but that, they're using this part of their thumb, and others like myself use kind of this part of the thumb. I have kind of a hitchhiker's thumb. If you can see that, it can kind of bend back extra far. So not everybody can do that. So my thumb is going to be a little bit different where I place it than yours might be, But great question. Yeah, having that just wherever it needs to be to support your hand in that current playing situation. So there's no set it and forget it place for the thumb where you can say, oh, I'm going to like even draw a mark on the back of my neck and always put my thumb here. No, even if you're in that position all the time, that just doesn't work. You're going to want to allow it to be a little bit fluid to put the support where it's needed.
So Edwards Keith also says, that is what I was worried about because I heard a lot of seasoned players saying they had wrist problems in the long run. So I was wondering, do you have any advice to avoid wrist problems?
I do actually. I do. So I can show you a few stretches. Also, if you guys are noticing the way I wear my guitar is a little bit strange, and that is actually a more recent thing that I started doing for specifically this reason of the wrist, because I noticed that I was not able to get a good angle on my wrist when I was sitting with it in the more traditional way that I used to. So when the guitar neck is up here, my wrist doesn't really have to move. Do you see how my wrist is more or less... Sorry, I'm trying to find the best camera. It's more or less flat, right? And I just kind of bring it here. It's mostly in the elbow that I'm bending and allowing this to come to me. If I'm holding my guitar like... I'm sorry, I don't want to lose the camera, but if I'm holding it on the traditional way where you kind of rest it on the right knee, a lot of us have a habit to pronate our wrist up like this. Okay, and that's what we want to avoid. This direction on our wrist is really bad. It causes a lot of tension on the carpal tunnels here. So ideally we want it to be neutral. Let me try to find a good angle with the camera here. The other direction where it would be coming in this way, that's better. We still don't want to leave it like extremely bent and like that for prolonged periods of time, but if we put our hands at rest, it's going to kind of curl that way a little bit. So if you have a little bit of curl going sort of inward, that's okay, but ideally you want it to be pretty much straight. Oh, here's a good angle. So this way is okay, but ideally you want it to be closer to pretty much straight. This way you really want to avoid, because I can already feel, and you can try this at home too and see if you notice this. When you tilt your hand that way, can you feel how these tendons become a little bit tighter? And that's the thing that you mainly have to be concerned of, I think. And if I'm holding my guitar this way and I'm playing like this, look how my wrist is doing that. And I see a lot of people do that. So you're going to want to keep your wrist straight, but then that could give you other problems with your hand. Maybe your angle of your frets can't make it. Actually, this is okay. I'm getting a pretty good angle on my wrist, and this is how I played for years and how a lot of us play. And you totally can play healthily here, I believe. But for me, I was trying to just experiment with different things, and I found that when I bring my arm to the guitar like this, this is more of the way classical players would hold it, right? They'd have a footstool or something, and they'd support the instrument like this. And I just noticed that I don't have to hardly bend my wrist at all, and I can just allow my wrist to be in the shape that it wants to be, and I bring the instrument to me instead of bringing myself to my instrument. There are very few bad places, bad motions we can make, but there are a lot of bad places we can sort of rest. So if you bend your wrist this way I was telling you not to, that's fine. Your wrist can bend that way, but what we don't want to do is leave it like that for prolonged periods of time as we do like a 4-hour practice session or something. That's a bad place to rest. We want to be at a neutral place of comfort when we're kind of resting. So keep that in mind as you're practicing. That's a great question. You can keep a lot of tension in your back and shoulders if you're like me. So that's other things to be concerned about. Let me show you a few stretches here for the wrist, and be really gentle with these. I don't know if these are medically sanctioned or not. These are ones that I use to just kind of warm myself up that I think work. But if you're getting any pain, just go ahead and stop. That's not the point of these exercises, to really stretch yourself out. It's to just kind of warm up. I'm going to dip this down a little bit. Okay, so how I do this is I put out the wrist that I'd like to stretch, and then I pinch right about here, and then I put my elbows together. It's kind of hard for me to do over the guitar, but I put my elbows together like this, and that causes this to stretch inward like that. And don't push too hard. You might hurt yourself, but you just kind of want to gently bring the elbows together and take some nice deep breaths. Okay, and just feel that. Okay, you can also do the outward one. This is the direction I was warning you against, so really be careful here. But it's our bodies are made to bend that way as long as they're not kept there for a really prolonged period of time. So do a nice breath, breathe back. I always do the other side just to even everything up, you know. This one where you put your hand like this and you reach back. This one's a little weird and kind of hard for me to explain, but you're going to grab your wrist and your thumb is going to be on the back of your hand like this. And then you're going to twist your hand this way, and that kind of twists your wrist this way, if that makes sense. It's a little hard to understand. It's a little hard to show with the guitar in the way also, but I find that one to be helpful. But again, the main important thing is to treat it as a gentle stretch. Don't do anything. It's not, you know, you're not training for the Olympics, and you're not, you know, I don't want you to hurt yourself or anything. But yeah, warming up is also a good thing that can prevent wrist problems if we just totally play cold and we're not aware of these kind of things. So doing just a little hand massage before you play and getting the blood flowing, warming up with those sequences. I mentioned that those could be used for a warm-up. So stuff like that can be good. Stuff that's not too complicated, and you can get your head around it and just kind of get your fingers moving before you actually get into the hard stuff and the meat of your practicing. Yeah. And yeah, playing health is such an important thing. Posture and all this stuff that, you know, there's just so much to think about as we learn guitar. It's impossible to focus on all of it. So a lot of us get so wrapped up in learning the notes, the scales, the chords, and then sometimes we have really bad technical habits, right? Because we can do things, but we've learned them the wrong way just because we were so focused on integrating the information and stuff. So don't get discouraged about that. Everybody I know has bad technical habits that they go back and work on. You know, it's just kind of the way it goes. I think there's very lucky few that grow up just playing with perfect technique from the get-go, you know. And yeah, it is difficult to relearn, but it's super important. And you start paying attention to stuff like that, the angle of your wrist, the tension you hold in your shoulders and stuff like that, all of a sudden your playing can start opening up in some really cool ways. Yeah, great questions. Thanks a lot for that. All right. So, I didn't get too much chance to talk about the cage system or the modes or 3-note per string scales, and it doesn't look like I'll have much time to give you a brief summary of that today, but I just wanted to kind of point out that those things are related to what we talked about, and if you're familiar with those concepts, you can kind of hopefully tie them in. If you're not and you're looking for something else to study, you can kind of find stuff on JamPlay or wherever that talks about that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the best thing to know about that is it's just kind of different approaches. So the ones we did were closed positions, but they could also be considered modes. If I was starting on any one of the notes and calling it a mode, that's also true. It could also be sort of considered the cage system, because somewhere in there we're going to have, so the cage system stands for C, A, G, E, and D. Caged. It spells the word caged, right? And these shapes, those 4 or 5 shapes? 4 or 5. Okay. Those 5 shapes happen around the neck all the time, right? So if I'm here, that cage system stuff is in there somewhere, you know. But again, that's kind of, we're just kind of scratching the surface. I almost don't even want to get into that because we won't have time to go deeper on it. But I don't think that system is as thorough as the one that I've been explaining to you guys with the position. So if you want to keep going into the position stuff, I think you'll have a really, really easy time learning about the cage system, the 3-note per string stuff, and also the modes, because you'll see how they're all really interrelated. You'll be in a really good place to understand all that stuff because of all the stuff we've talked about here. And don't think that you necessarily have to go looking into that. I know when I first, not even when I first started, but just a lot of times as I've been progressing in guitar, I've always felt like I had to learn the next thing, you know. Well, there has to be another scale, I have to learn the next thing, which is, you know, good. But, you know, there's also a lot of stuff and a lot of work that can be done with the stuff you already know. So just everything in these lessons can be worked on for a really long time also. So don't feel like you have to expand and just constantly learn the next thing. Sometimes being disciplined with a few different concepts is way more beneficial, and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to focus on box 1 of the pentatonic scale all week, and I'm not going to even really worry about putting other stuff into my practice time. I'm just going to kind of focus on that. Next week, maybe I'll do box 2, or I'll switch to major scales or something like that, Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in here and being part of this 6-week series. This has been a lot of fun. I really hope I was able to clear some of the mystery up with the fretboard. Hope you guys are able to start seeing some of these patterns and how you can transpose them to different places. Hope you're starting to learn the importance of, realize the importance of learning the notes on your fretboard and starting to get a little more familiar with that. And I hope to see you again real soon here at jamplay.com, and we'll have a lot more fun and kind of nerd out on more guitar stuff. And now that you know all this, we can even expand upon it even more and talk about some of those other concepts I mentioned. Excellent, guys. Well, thanks a lot for tuning in, and I'll see you again. Bye.